change positions.
Has a show on MMA Fighting's Twitter ever ended with such stumbling words as I just
slate. This is a whole different thing.
Beautiful.
Wow.
It was beautiful.
I could not. I'm probably gonna get fired for that, and I don't even blame him.
That was a below average performance.
It was a below average performance. Yes, it was. Very good.
Most
young
below
Danny
average
Segura.
American.
It was. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Luke Thomas here, of course, with Jeff and with Chuck and with Danny. We just finished the regular MMA beat. Now we're going to do After the Beat, where we're going to take your questions. Use the hashtag, the MMA beat. And, of course, if you are watching us, as you're watching us, thank you very much on Twitter, which we're always very excited to be on. So, without further ado, gentlemen.
Let's try it.
Let's see what we have. Now, my vision sucks. So, can you guys read? Wait. Can you read who sent it?
Yeah, David.
Okay, David. All right, David. If Bisping beats GSP and then successfully defends the title versus Robert Whittaker, Jeff Wagenheim, is he the greatest middleweight of all time?
I'm going to say no, but it's a kind of a illogical no because he will have beaten the greatest. He would have beaten the greatest welterweight.
Welterweight, yes.
Oh, so that's actually.
But he would have beaten Dan Henderson, who was the welterweight and middleweight champion, which was middleweight and light heavyweight for Pride.
I'm still going to say no.
Luke Rockhold?
I'm still going to say no because
Anderson Silva?
He beat the shadow of Dan Henderson, the shadow of Anderson Silva, and presumably the shadow of GSP. I mean, really, the only guy.
You ain't shit. Wow.
Look, I mean, I'm sorry, Mike, but the one guy that he would have beaten at his peak is
Luke Rockhold.
Was Luke Rockhold, and that's nothing to be sneezed at. It was a great performance. But the other guys were all guys who were kind of over the hill. I don't know whether we'll find out what GSP is really over the hill, but if he beats him, he probably is.
I agree with Jeff. It matters when you beat him. I mean, or else are we going to start calling Yair Rodriguez one of the best featherweights?
Yes, we are.
So I think, we can't forget about Anderson Silva. Obviously, I would say, Bisping's up there for sure. I mean, he's already up there, one of the greatest middleweights, of all time. And if he gets past, GSP, definitely, gives him a little boost in the rankings. But I mean, Anderson Silva just destroyed the middleweight
division. I suppose if you're going straight up off of like name value of who he beat, let's say he gets by GSP, you'd be like, wow, this guy, just in a black and white sense, beat all these legends, at the end of his career. But it is the twilight of the idols. I mean, like you mentioned, this is the guys who are all at the tail end of their careers when he's catching them. And let's not mistake it, Bisping also deserves credit at the end of his career to have done that himself. Right. But I still think, I mean, it's got to be Anderson Silva. He held the title for like 6 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Changed weight classes.
Changed weight classes, and that one time when the affliction card's going, it goes up and they create a card out of nowhere and fights James Irvin, and I'm like, at that point, or like a Forrest Griffin when he does that one. I mean, you just see his wizardry in there. So in my mind, I think he's got to be and I know both those fights were at light heavyweight, but in my mind, he's the guy.
Yeah, sometimes
I always identify him as the guy.
Sometimes when I'm just looking up stuff about like old boxers, guys who fought before my time. I know there aren't too many that did that, but back.
Did they have boxing back then?
Back in the old days.
Knuckle.
Yeah, like Jack Johnson. So I'll look at these guys and I'll go to the Box Rec website with all the records, but it gives you these names and it gives you the dates, but unless you actually can put that into context, you don't know that this guy defeated that guy when that guy was, over the hill and was not. And I think that's kind of where we are with Bisping. Yes, he will have defeated the guy who I would say is the best middleweight of all time, Anderson Silva, and the guy who I would say is the best welterweight of all time, George St. Pierre. If he gets this win next week, he will own victories over the greatest at two weight classes. But in both cases, it will have come at a time when those guys were not at their peak.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Anderson Silva's middleweight resume is ridiculous. Right. And watching that whole run was just incredible at the time. So I think that sort of is worth acknowledging. I will say, man, Michael Bisping, if he beats George St. Pierre and then calls it a day, or even if he doesn't call it a day, but even if he gets that win, bro, his resume has transformed in the last year. It's kind of shocking that you can do that at the end of your career, like to get all those wins that you couldn't get, all the fights that you couldn't get. Not to mention
just the straight-up opportunism of stepping in against Rockhold, and then that's the catalyst for all of this.
It's crazy. It's shocking. Yeah. What a total turn of events. Yeah. And the other part, though, is just to what you're talking about was context. I had not Jim Lampley, I'm sorry. I had, God, what was his name? I can't remember his name anymore because I haven't slept well. But he was on my show when I was at Mayweather McGregor. I mean, to point about context, what does it all mean?
Al Bernstein?
No, it wasn't Al. It was
Jim Gray.
Jim Gray.
Sounds like.
Jim Gray. Yes, Jim
I knew
Gray.
it the whole time.
Yeah, I know.
Just.
The point being was he was just sort of talking about context. You know, I was asking like what he thought of McGregor, and he was like, "Look, can you name the 21st opponents that Rocky Marciano fought? And more to the point, can you tell me if definitively any of them are better than McGregor?" And I was like, you know what? No and no, I can't tell you that. And he was just sort of this is a bit of an aside, but he was just sort of basically arguing that there was some validity to it, that Mayweather had kind of gone like this in terms of the talent he was fighting, and then had come back down, but was still. This was no worse than what Marciano had built his record on.
Right.
And so there was some worth acknowledging that. I think the Bisping situation's markedly different, but you get the idea. All right, who's next? All right, this comes from Glock Lesnar. Well, this gentleman sounds well-adjusted. When and what was the first fight or combat sports event that you felt compelled to find and view via the internet? Now, Danny, you are post-pubescent.
Let me take you back to 2016.
Yeah. Let's start with you, since you come from a slightly different MMA generation than the rest of us.
I have no idea. Well, my first experience with MMA was watching The Ultimate Fighter, the very first one.
Did you watch it on the internet?
No, I watched it on Spike.
Okay, so this question's about the internet.
I know, but I just can't remember. I'm probably like the first.
Like one you had heard of, and you're like, let me go find that. Da, 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 da.
Man.
Hard to say.
Yeah, I've watched so many fights.
Let me take this one then second, because I didn't have
Probably a Kimbo Slice fight in Miami.
fair enough.
Backyard.
That's fair enough.
It's combat.
Because the reality is, when I got into MMA, YouTube was around, but it wasn't the YouTube that we know today. It just didn't exist in the same form. If you wanted to do what I did, there were two ways to get old Pride or old Pancrase or whatever you wanted, or King of the Cage, San Antonio, Palo Alto. You're like, what? Was torrents, which you can still get, and then Best Buy. Best Buy in my hometown used to have just rows and rows and rows of old Pride DVDs, including the Mark Coleman win for the Grand Prix, and some of these I caught live. I caught Fedor versus Krokop live, but there was some of the ones that I missed, and you could catch them all. That's how I found out about Don Fry. I popped in an old thing, and there he was, because I had missed that part where he had ascended, that WrestleBoxer era. I had missed that. So for me, Best Buy, and I'm trying to think the first event. It'd be hard to pinpoint, but I would say I distinctly remember I bought UFC Ultimate Knockouts 1 or 2. And I'll never forget watching, because I'd missed this one too live, I'd never forget watching Phil Baroni dribble Dave Monet's head off of the cage, where he was literally levitating a guy who wanted to fall but couldn't because the punches were holding him up. That one sticks out in my mind.
It's hard to pinpoint for me also. I mean, I was watching before DVD, I was watching VHS tapes of UFC 1 and 2. And so probably within a year or two after the first couple UFCs happened, I was watching them on those tapes. And I probably watched maybe the first 4 or 5 UFC events that way, and then kind of drifted away from the sport probably 96 or so.
Right.
Wasn't paying much attention to it anymore. And then when The Ultimate Fighter came on, I was like, oh, I remember watching that. At that point, when I started watching that, I became interested in that period in between. Yes. And then there was some internet around, so I would sort of cherry pick fights from sometime between, after UFC 5 through whatever, wherever the Ultimate Fighter picked up. So at that point, probably, I was probably looking up, gosh, I don't even know, probably some of the fighters who I was interested. The first UFC was Couture and was it Couture and Chuck, the coaches? Was that the
first season?
Yeah,
the
first season.
Yeah, I think maybe he was trying to go back and watch
them on the Lazy Boys.
I think it was probably
with Willa Ford, the host.
It was probably trying to go. I was probably going back to watch one of those guys and see their fights. I'm not sure which ones they would have been, but I would have probably gone back and traced back and said, typed in Randy Couture and tried to watch his stuff.
I mean, man, all the time in the day, I'd go back and watch stuff on the internet.
It's hard to remember.
Yeah. I more remember rabbit holes you go down about watching certain guys.
Yep.
And I remember going back to some early Uriah Faber stuff when he was fighting Tyson Griffin outdoors,
which I had
not seen at the time, and I remember And
Gladiator Challenge, right?
Same thing with like guys like I think Mike Pyle. I remember one time going down the line, I was like, God, this guy's fought. Like you only saw this product at the end, but you're like, this dude, he fought Rampage Jackson's first fight. And I remember going back and watching things like that. You know, it's more like that. Like you get in these rabbit holes, and those are a long time ago. I cannot remember though, honestly, like when I really went back and
You're going to tell us about the first porn you went and looked at. Is that where you're going?
You want to talk about something I can't remember?
on the green door. I was 6 years
the
old.
waves of content that have washed that off. I was going to say, hilariously, I remember I bought like a King of the Cage like extravaganza DVD set. It must have had 10 DVDs in there. And these are like, it was occasionally you'd run across a guy who fought in UFC or something, but it was mostly just regional donks. And I can't remember who the commentators were, but I'll never forget, these two guys were just slugging it out. And the commentator goes, and everyone else got silent in the commentary booth after he said it. The commentator goes, wow, these two guys came here to bang. And then it was just silence, and I was like, wow, that's a great. I'll say this. Whenever someone calls my radio show and they go like, I've been watching UFC, my first UFC was UFC 1 and 2, I hang up on them right away. Because these are people who are like, if they get pulled over by the cops, they're like, how many beers did you have? Oh, just 2, officer, just 2. Mm-hmm. It's like the go-to lying response for someone clearly guilty. So I'll say this very, very quickly. What's the first UFC event you watched? Even the first MMA event. First UFC I watched was UFC 4. And a family friend who was into martial arts introduced me to it. Do you remember what first UFC?
You mean watching it live or watching
Not live. Like literally the first time you ever saw this.
I hate to tell you, but it was UFC 1. I mean, it was on VHS video.
Click.
How many beers did I have? I don't know how many beers I had.
2.
I had 2. I sat there and drank 2 beers.
I've been watching since UFC 1.
2 beers, 2 bong hits, and I watched UFC 1.
There you go.
Or UFC 2.
There you go.
Man, I don't know. I honestly don't remember. But it was in the 40s.
Okay.
The one where I watched live, where I know I sought it out.
Well, watching it live is different. I mean, the first time I actually watched it.
I went back and before then I'd seen the stuff, but it was always.
Literally the first time you saw this.
Yeah, no, it was definitely one.
Danny?
I don't remember which one it was, but I remember when I was like a kid in Colombia, somehow UFC came on. It had to be one of the very first ones as well. And I just have this vivid memory of Hoist Gracie walking out with the train.
Gracie
everybody,
train?
With the geese. And my dad was just like, what is this? This is in Colombia, right? Yeah. I don't know how the hell it came on TV.
That's funny.
But my dad would just call me El Karateka because he's the karate guy because, he had no idea about jiu-jitsu. And my brother and I were just like, what is this? I must have been like, I don't know, like 6 or 7 maybe.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I still remember that, but I don't remember who he fought or what event it was.
The UFC 4 when Kimo came out with the cross.
I think so. Yes.
So that was one I definitely.
And there was the one where there was, I think it was the hair pulling incident where you could still pull hair.
They ripped the ponytail.
Wasn't the Kimo one where Hoist couldn't go on to win the next one? That would have been 3 then, because he won 1.
3, that's right. Yeah, he won 1, 2, skipped 3.
He didn't skip 3, but he couldn't finish.
That's right.
He couldn't finish.
Couldn't finish. So it was a forfeit.
If anybody, a little piece of trivia. I know that the one, I think it was 4, when Kimo came out, and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson was in attendance when he was a little boy. He told me this story about how he was there, and he saw him come out with the cross with his dad, and that's what sold him to become a martial artist, which is a weird little,
Boy, I had
Christian, because he was a Satanist.
I had a very different response when I saw the cross. All right, let's go.
I don't think of the crime.
Let's go to the next question. This comes from Ryan. I cannot, dude. I should not be driving a car. Villegas. Name an athlete you admire that, if you could, go back in time and put them in MMA instead of the sport they actually went into. Jeff, you got some deep cuts on this one, I bet.
Oh, boy.
I know exactly which one I'm going to say.
I'll go Cam Neely.
Okay.
Why? Because I'm just thinking, I'm thinking of athletes who I admire. Then on top of that, I'm going with they have to be like really sort of tough guys. Because there are a lot of athletes I've loved watching, but I wouldn't call them necessarily tough guys in the sense that I could imagine them getting into a fight with somebody.
Sure.
I actually saw Cam Neely getting into fights on many a time while watching Bruins hockey games, and so I always like watching them.
Man, that's a toughie. But guys like maybe like Brian Bosworth, you know what I mean? Like guys like that from back in the day, just because they fit like a specific.
The Boz.
Well, he had like the kind of attitude, I guess. That maybe translate. I don't know, man.
Neely would kick his butt.
I'm sure he would. I don't know.
Especially,
I've got 3 great ones. Go ahead.
This is not a huge throwback, although the guy's been around forever. But in soccer, Zlatan Ibrahimovic.
Cannot stand that clown, but yes.
He has this. He trains martial arts, and like he's like one of the scariest guys out there. Like
Zlatan is one of the scariest guys out there.
In soccer, yeah. I mean, I would say so.
I mean, he's very, very talented. I wouldn't call him scary.
Well, he's always had this persona of like not taking shit from anyone.
Yeah.
And, like I don't know. I'm sure he's gotten into fights and he does martial arts as well.
How about Suarez? If you're talking soccer, if they change the unified
biting's
rules,
not allowed,
the unified rules don't allow biting.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Biting would be
no Suarez then.
Would be key. I have 3 names for you. Only
here we
two.
go.
Two I'm gonna pick on straight up athleticism. One I'm gonna pick because he was a prick.
Okay.
First 2 on athleticism, easy calls. Deion Sanders, one of the best athletes I've ever seen. I would think one of the only guys there in the same week.
But he went through an entire NFL career of never making a tackle.
Okay, hold on. Hit a home run and scored a touchdown the same week. We're talking about an insane level of athleticism. You mentioned the Boz.
Bo
How about
Jackson,
the
the guy who ran
Bo
over?
Jackson, dude?
I thought about that.
Dude, people who grow up now, they're like, so-and-so's a 2-sport athlete. No, they're not. No, they're not.
Yeah.
A 2-sport athlete is a guy who's a baller in 2 sports. And when we grew up, the iconic shoulder pads, baseball bat over the head of Bo Jackson. You cannot imagine. Bo Jackson was a god.
I mean, ran up the wall.
Dude, I've never seen an athlete like that in my life.
Yeah.
You get a guy like that in MMA, God only knows. Even if they're not a good, tough guy.
That's a great one. That's
Bo
a fantastic-
Jackson was
break the bat on his
insane
helmet for
athlete.
Yeah.
Look at Deadspin published these a while ago. Go back and look at old scouting reports, and you can read what the scouts were saying about him. Either football or baseball, and they were talking about his athleticism, and there was everything was off the charts,
Yeah.
off the charts, off the charts. So Bo Jackson,
ridiculous.
but
Who's the prick?
The prick. This is an easy call. Bill Lambier.
Oh, wow.
Bill Lambier, guy who doesn't mind a little bit of bumping elbows and
See, I'd pay to
illegal
see him
shots.
just get beat up. That would
So,
be,
yeah, we get,
But that makes him a great
I know,
choice.
exactly.
put him in the cage of Robert Parrish, and he goes down.
Parasite's that
Bill
reach.
Lambier. There you go. I think that's a great choice, and he's still got a big mouth.
I feel like you had more time to ponder these questions. Than
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
But anyway, let's.
Maybe I'm just better at this.
Maybe.
All right, what do we got? Does anyone know if this comes from Evan O'Connor, by the way? This Connor with 2 N's. Does anyone know if Tony Ferguson thinks the Earth is flat like Eddie Bravo? Who wants to field that one?
I believe that Ferguson thinks that Eddie Bravo was flat.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know either, but
Not carbonated.
it's
Man,
I would say
wouldn't put
no.
it past Ferguson. He's kind of
know.
out there with his
Ferguson,
ranging philosophy.
Ferguson, man, do you ever see that old Chris Rock movie? It was a recurring character. I guess you not, since you were probably 3. You were like a zygote at that point. I don't know, But the Chris Rock show used to air on HBO. This was very much a precursor to the Chappelle show.
Yeah.
Apparently somebody got body slammed outside.
That's what it
the
sounded
hell
like.
just happened. He had a character called Pootie Tang. Do you guys remember Pootie Tang? Pootie Tang's bit was a number of things, but the chief component to the bit was he would just say gibberish and still acted like he was the coolest guy in the room, and it just kind of worked. They'd be like, Pootie Tang, what are you gonna do? And Pootie Tang would go, sign those papers on the running Kai. You'd be like, what? And everyone like, all right, Pootie Tang. You have Tony on your show. He will say things, and afterwards you're like, I don't know exactly what that meant. But everyone's like, you know what? It's authentic. At least it comes from internal. He's not trying to be somebody else. He's not trying to be what you want. Most importantly, Tony Ferguson is not trying to be what you want him to be. Right. And this leads him into bizarre territory at times. But I would take that 10 times over 10 over somebody who wants me to think there's somebody else. Now, whether that leads to flat earth theory, I don't know. I will say, you know who I wanted to see get into MMA, only to watch them get the absolute, S beat out of them? What's his face? Not Kyrie Irving, who also is a flat earther. Who's the idiot who plays for Golden State? Draymond Green.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God, I can't stand Draymond Green.
Yeah.
Draymond Green was like, yeah, maybe Kyrie's got a point. Get out. Get the GTFO, Draymond Green.
This is pretty flat.
Last thing on this. Don't you feel like inside MMA, every population has a portion of its own population that subscribes to crazy-ass loony conspiracy theories. I feel like MMA is a little bit more tolerant of those because Eddie Bravo is obviously an incredibly accomplished coach and trainer at this point. You can call him that, right?
Yeah.
Well, not trainer exactly, but certainly he has raised a number of black belts. He's a promoter. He helped Tony get to where he's at. Tony got his black belt from him most recently. And they believe this stuff. And even Ronda Rousey, remember when they did the Sandy Hook thing, was like, I don't know, check this out. Am I wrong about that, Chuck? Or is there a little bit of that element to MMA, more so than normal?
Oh, yeah. It's for sure there. Some of that's, I don't know. I mean, we could cite a million examples,
And
actually.
some of these are harmless, some are not so harmless.
GSP with the aliens.
GSP with the aliens.
100%. Yeah.
Oh my God, I completely forgot about that.
When you exist on the fringe, which, you know, I know the UFC and MMA in general has moved a little bit toward the mainstream of the sports world, but still, it's on the fringe to a great extent. And you have a little more latitude because you don't have to be quite as whitewashed as the rest of the sports. I mean, you would never imagine, you know, we talked about a couple of athletes. You're talking about Kyrie and Draymond. I mean, those guys are looked at as kind of oddballs in their sport. But guys in MMA, you know, they can sort of get away with saying stuff that seems pretty odd, but it's idiosyncratic more than anything.
I mean, at the end of the day, these people are getting in the cage and fighting somebody else in front of millions of people.
You're going to get a few strange theories along the way.
Theories, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? Tony Ferguson, don't change. I like him exactly the way he is.
Boxing's always been like that, too. They've always had the colorful characters through the ages that have had all these ridiculous things. So,
you know what I wish?
fighting.
You know how Garfield used to mail Nermal to Abu Dhabi and be like, hey, come here, Nermal, get in here. And he would send him off to Abu Dhabi. I wish we could do that with Draymond Green.
Not Abu Dhabi, though.
Yeah, maybe the moon or something. Just leave him there.
Is the moon flat?
You know what? Ask Draymond. He'll tell you. All right, this is from Tony Thumbpoke. I can read that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Presuming, okay, I picked these questions, so direct all blame to Danny. Presuming aliens and ghosts, Danny, are both real, how do you presume aliens deal with ghosts?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yes, it is. Now, this is a Halloween-themed question because we'll be on technically after Halloween, so I will call this the Halloween-themed question.
So, like, do they see the ghosts? Because the Sixth Sense type thing, because then they're just common lot, right? Like
This is not an area of expertise.
Look, if you're an alien,
Maybe we should bring in GSP.
You're an alien. You come to this world, right? You're an alien.
Yep.
Everything to you, we're all the aliens. So these aliens who show up here, we're all the oddballs. And then so they look out, they see a human, ghost, dog, you know, moose, cat. You know, they just see all different things, and it's all the same. And they don't.
They just
This is what smoking weed for 40 years will get you.
I thought about this.
God bless him. How many times has he ripped a bong and thought about, well, where are the aliens when the aliens come? Anyone want to expand on that?
I think I've said.
You can't expand on that. Come on.
I think Jeff kind of killed that one.
That's it right there. That's it.
I think we have one more. Two more. One more. One more? No? That's it? We ran through them? Wow, look at that. We ran through them. How about that?
Wow.
All right,
It would have been a little more long-winded had I known that.
Yeah, I would have just rambled and taken up airtime. That's fine. I have to get on the subway anyway. It's quite all right. Let me set the record straight here if we can. We are on next week. There will be an MMA beat. It will be on Thursday. That's not changing. Ariel should be back in this chair, and so you're going to go to 217. Yes?
Yes.
You're going to go to 217.
I'll be around.
You're going to be around.
I'll be around.
Long story.
Some capacity.
In some capacity. I will be here as well. The only thing I was told was that I believe the press conference for UFC 217 starts at 3, if I'm not mistaken. Yes? And we're all the way downtown. We're like way downtown. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to go from 1 to 1:45, and then we'll do like 15 or 20 minutes of this, and then we'll go on to the presser, right?
That was the
I
plan.
think that's the plan.
All right, so be on the lookout for that. Okay, gentlemen, very, very good.
Yeah.
Poor job handling that aliens and ghost question.
That was a tough one.
It
Yeah.
was a very tough
Oh,
one.
I killed it.
He did kill it, I have to say, Jeff. The dude abides. He certainly does. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. Subscribe to MMA Fighting. We always appreciate that when you do. By the way, shouts to Guilherme Cruz, who, of course, is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, covering the return of Lyoto Machida and the entire event. Keep it locked here on this YouTube channel. We have stuff from all the open workouts, from the weigh-ins, which will be, of course, tomorrow. We've got everything from soup to nuts. So if you're looking for more and on-the-scenes coverage for UFC Sao Paulo, this is the place to be. And he's always, as usual, doing a great job down there in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, for us. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. We are out of here. For Danny, for Chuck, for Jeff, for Ariel, I am Luke. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.